Hi everyone and welcome back. Welcome to the Uber Eats clone app. And in the last video, we talked about the user session management using cookies or using JWT token. So now I will just talk theoretically. Okay, let's say if you don't want to write user authentication service, then how you can achieve the same thing, right? So let's say if you might have heard about the Auth0. Auth0 is also an authentication provider, which is really powerful. Auth0. Here it's, let's say this is our Auth0. What change we have to do for to use the Auth0 as a provider? Obviously we are not going to write a user management in our application. So let's say this is my React app or any kind of app. Let's say this is my React app. Okay, so I will go to Auth0. Auth0 is actually third party provider. I will go there and I will create an application. What I will do is I will create an app on Auth0 console, and that will give me the client ID. That client ID I will configure in my React application. So obviously I need to use Auth0 SDK or whatever. So this is React app, and here we will use Auth0 SDK. Now, and you will just provide some kind of a button when you click onto that button, or some login form, because now authentication is not done by you. You just create a button saying, or just create a route, right? Route, let's say for login, and this login will take you to a simple login screen, which is Auth0 login screen, because now you are already using the Auth0 client ID and you are using Auth0 SDK, so it knows what needs to be done if user session doesn't exist. So it will present you to Auth0 login screen. Okay, you will be entering the username password, that's for sure, because there will be a console. It will prompt you, just pass your username and password. Okay, and then because this is you, this is your user, this is you, developer, who actually created an application on Auth0 saying that I wanted to create authentication system for the front end web app. Okay, you entered all the information. Here you need to enter a lot of information like callback URL, application name, what is the redirect URL, and all those information you have already configured. You have already conveyed Auth0 that once user is successfully logged in through the Auth0, then redirect the user to my login callback screen. So this is, let's say, the callback. This is the front end route. Once the user is able to successfully redirect user to the login callback. So this Auth0 will be able to redirect user to this particular route. But what is happening when you enter the username password? You are going to talk to the Auth0. Auth0 will take you the consent from the user. Okay, do you want to allow this particular application, this Auth0 app which you configured here, to read your data from Auth0 database? And here is your Auth0 database, maybe like the Auth0 systems, which are checking that your username password is correct, because Auth0 is managing your information. Whatever username, password, metadata, app metadata, everything about you. Now Auth0 will take a consent that can I share your data to this React application, and when you say yes, then it will redirect you to that application. And typically this is what happens to all the auth protocol, like either you use Auth0, either you use a Google provider or a social Facebook provider. What happens is, let's say if I want to use a Facebook, so this is my Facebook. Here I will create an application on the Facebook developer console, and you will get a client ID from the Facebook, and that client ID or client secret you will configure on the front end. and you will provide one button. Okay, login with Facebook, right? Login with Facebook. Now what Facebook will do is Facebook will present you a login screen, and where you will enter your Facebook credentials, because it's not your username password, you don't have your account in the application. You will enter your Facebook username password. Then Facebook will say, okay, your credentials are correct. It will check in its own system, and then it will say, it will ask the consent. Okay, do you want to share this information with this React app? Do you want to share your user information with this React app, which some developer has configured and has the client ID and using it? And you will say consent yes. Then Facebook will look into the application which you have configured here, what is the callback URL and all, and then it will redirect you again to this front-end React app with the access token. Okay, this is like login with a Google, login with Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And now it's on you how you manage the tokens and all. But this is how it works in Auth0 Auth protocol. Auth0 is universally powerful because in Auth0 you can configure all these social providers, enterprise providers, SAML connections, social provider connections and all, everything here. Here we are using database, simple Auth0 database connection, where you are entering the username password. Okay, so you onboarded this authentication mechanism to Auth0, and this is using Auth protocol. What happens is you first create an application, and then you are giving your responsibility of authentication to a third party provider. So Auth0 will ask you the consent. Okay, do you want to share your information which is stored in the Auth0 to this React app? If it says yes, then Auth0 will return access token, and then React application with this access token can ask your application data, which is protected. So you need to have a token provided by Auth0. So there is a resource server, which is your APIs. This is your resource server, and this is your authorizer your Auth0. So once you have a token, you will get that token and ask the authorizer, is this token valid, can I access this search data and all. It just out of curiosity I wanted to explain this topic, nothing much. Now we want to create a development platform. Okay, these days Docker is powerful. It's not like, okay, we are writing a monolith here and not writing a single front-end app. So what my always idea is, I use Docker for everything on my front end and every type of development. For now, we are going to have at least minimal 3 applications, which is one is a proxy, one is a front end, and one is a authentication service. These things will grow day by day, right? So is it not better to use the Docker containers and run those? Let's say this is your authentication service. This is my proxy service, and your front end you can run using just npm run dev. But let's say the order service, search service, tomorrow you might need Elasticsearch, RabbitMQ or something like that, right? So what we are doing here is we are already using Nest.js, which is already decided. So this is the Nest.js app. These are actually microservices. What we are doing is we are building individual microservices. And microservice word is really a hype. When you heard microservice, it is like something out of the box. No, whatever we were doing earlier, now we are just doing a minimal. We just converted whatever the service we are writing into micro, so that it is totally decoupled with other set of services. If I need to fetch the user data or something, or search data, I don't need to talk to another service. It should be a minimal, so that whatever the user needs, it should be able to provide it. And we are using Docker containers. Let's say I'm going to use Postgres. So on local setup, we are going to use Docker containers. Postgres also we are going to spin up using Docker. And all these services are going to have their own database. Proxy doesn't have a database. We don't need to manage a database for this. But let's say other services we are going to build, they will have databases, their own database, because we don't have a shared database. Each and every service will have their own database, and we will interact with that. This is a proxy service, and maybe this is your front end. Front end, you can run just simply npm run dev, or you can also create a container for it. So everything is like inside one Dockerized environment. Why we actually need Dockerized environment? First of all, because now we are not going to install Postgres on my system so that I can connect to the Node.js application. What we do is we spin up the Docker containers for the Postgres, for the MongoDB, MySQL. That's it. And then your, if you want to, because these are the containers, and container is something like this. Let's talk about the container a little bit. Docker container. If you are interested like what is Docker container, you can actually look into my playlist, which is already there. This is the Docker container, and what it is provides. It's actually a minimal Linux container which is able to run Nginx, Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB. So if I want to use a MongoDB or MySQL, I will connect to this container. Now these containers exposes two ports, container port and host port. This is, let's say, the host port, and this is container port. Now the port mapping, let's say here I'm running my laptop. This is my laptop and I just wanted to connect to this container. So obviously you will use the host port to connect to it. But if there is already a container, already a Node.js service running inside a container, and there is already a container, then you will use the container port to connect to this. And to access this container port, both these containers should be inside a Docker environment, Docker network. For that we use Docker Compose. Okay, so this whole environment, I can convert that into a single Docker container, Docker network. So this can be your Docker network, and here you can put n number of services. And why we talk about the Docker when it comes to microservices, because if you want to set up a local network, local development system where you have multiple services, if I need to talk to do the login, I need a proxy also available, proxy service also running. So we will create a Docker network, and that can be created using Docker Compose. So it's just a utility which available in the Docker tool. Docker Compose up, we write a Docker Compose YML, put all these containers to put all these applications. These individual applications will also have a Docker files, because Docker containers gets created through the Docker file for the services. And for other Docker containers, it will pull from the Docker hub, like Postgres image, it will pull MySQL, MongoDB. For this Node.js service, because we need to deploy our Node.js code and run the Node.js service on this container, so we will write a Docker file, will install, and it will have a Node.js, and it will do npm run start. It's like your small Linux container is there which is running a Node.js service. And let's say this service is running on, there will be defined port, it's running on port 3000, this is running on 3001. So we know, like, we will define all these ports, and this is how they will communicate with one another. So these concepts are important, and you should be aware how to use Docker at least. If not, then you can look into one of my playlist is already there. So let's talk about simple authentication service first. We are going to create a minimal microservice which will do all those things. We can expose the endpoints, which is like login, register, and validate, reset password, forget password, all these kind of REST endpoints from this REST API. Okay, I can create a one video of like 3 hours, but sometimes it's also tiring for me, so I create these chunk of videos, like one video max of 20 minutes. Now coming to the Node.js service, if you are not familiar with the microservice concept much, then there is a Node.js microservice playlist already available which talks about core, very basics, because here I cannot talk about Node.js microservice development and all, and Docker Compose, like Docker in depth, but you can refer those. I will send a link. In next video, we will set up a baseline, the Next.js code with the Docker Compose and all, and we will write our modules. Okay, let's see that in the next video.